Hello, everybody. This is Luke Johnson from Noetic, the Humanities Teaching app, and I'm joined by Robert Schut as we close out our seminar series on Soren Kierkegaard's works of love. It has been a labor of love. We've been at this for about 6 months, 6.5 months. Took a while, but I have to say, as Bob and I were discussing earlier, I think it's something that we can be proud of, that we created such a seminar series for this text. No one else has done it, as far as we know. Bob, are there any sort of preemptive remarks that you would like to say before we get into it? Just so everybody knows, I'll be covering chapter 10 today, then Bob will be closing things out with the discussion of the conclusion. So it'll be kind of a tag team effort today.
Yes, and it's an accomplishment. Like I was saying earlier, we kind of set the bar out there. Since it's one of a kind right now, hopefully somebody can come by and use what we've done to build something better. At least we've set a foundation for others, and hopefully somebody will use this for the good.
I hope so. I could see this being very helpful for someone who wanted to produce an even speedier synopsis of what Soren Kierkegaard was trying to do, or someone who was researching this for a doctoral dissertation or some other sort of research project. So without further ado, why don't we jump into it? So, like I mentioned, I'm responsible for covering chapter 10 today, which is entitled The Work of Love and Praising Love. And there are a few crucial points that I wanted to dwell on here. It won't take me too long to get through these notes. So, praising love is a work, not an art for those blessed with a unique talent. It's something that everyone can perform. We praise love only in our love of truth. How else could we praise love if we were not fully in the truth? It would be a deceptive sham otherwise. In order to effectively praise love, much discipline is required. Living in the truth is not easy. One must be abstemious, eschewing all distractions in order to concentrate on one thought. It is so very strenuous. But let's talk more about this strenuous task of living in truth and praising love. How is it accomplished? The direction of the thought must be inward. One can be attentive to something external, but there is the risk of our thinking being unclear. All right, so what does Kierkegaard mean by our thinking being unclear? I thought it would be wise to include this passage from page 332 of the Harper Torch Books edition of Works of Love. Ellipses, ellipses, ellipses. It is something else to be so turned in thought that constantly at every moment one himself becomes conscious in reflection, conscious of one's own condition or how it is with oneself under reflection. But only the latter is essentially what thinking is. It is, in fact, transparency. The first is unclear thinking, which suffers from a contradiction. That which in thinking clarifies something else is itself basically unclear. Such a thinker explains something else is itself basically unclear. Sorry, I repeated myself. Such a thinker explains something else by his thought, and lo, he does not understand himself. So what I took that to mean is thought is superficial if not focused on inwardness. When there is no external object to think, there is a self-deepening direction to thought where the soul is searched. The discovery is a humiliating selfishness that must be snapped in the God relationship. Only when we have strained our spiritual powers in such a way do we become an instrument. In perseverance, one will gain their best powers. However, they are merely on loan from God, given to us in the process of self-renunciation. And this is where I want to pause and ask Bob a few questions. What about, I was just thinking about neurotics like Woody Allen, who introspect but never seem to find God. They do have this clarity of thought that's directed inwards, but it doesn't always lead to God as Kierkegaard seems to claim. It resembles a bit of a dog chasing its own tail. So what are we to make of this?
Well, there's a saying, always ever seeking but never coming to the truth. I think this fits a lot of people. People struggle to try to grasp the truth, at least in their own mind, and in my own evaluation of it. I think people, it's so easy. I don't want to make this sound like an accusation, so I won't. I think it's just so easy to try to justify what we do by saying that we are truth seekers. Which I've heard this term, truth seekers, too much by people who are not really seeking the truth. I think it really is an inward calling, and it has to be sincere in order for it to really be of any value. It's easy to say I'm seeking the truth, but it's not easy to devote yourself to it, to really devote yourself to it. I was trying to jot down some notes as you were talking here on that, talking about love of truth. And I feel that there was a point in my life when that became like a little switch turned on in my life. I was looking for Jesus. I was looking for religion. I was looking for satisfaction, purpose, all these wonderful theological terms, these wonderful goals, these altruistic goals. And, it really sounded good. I was convincing myself how great I was for even having these goals. But that's not really what it's about. It's not having them as goals. It's actually seeking after them and then living them. Our faith, Luke, has to be built on truth. Many people can have faith. I've seen it today. Millions of people have faith, but it's not built on truth. It's faith built on imagination, willful or wishful thinking. This is what I want Jesus to be like. This is what I want my religion to be like. And then they begin to believe it and worship it, but it's no different than idolatry. It's a different idolatry, except Jesus is the center of it. Their perception of Jesus. It's so hard to separate ourselves from that, because when we do, we automatically separate ourselves from the world.
I think that I'm really glad you pointed that out, because I think you're right that people want to live in this sort of la-la land about what faith actually is and cook up some sort of imaginary narrative about the nature of being a disciple of Christ. And that probably is an explanation for why intellectuals such as Woody Allen get turned off by it. It does sound like fairy tales to them. And these individuals who may have good intentions to try to understand and cognize the Christian message the best they can, when they go in and they tell other people about it, you can understand why someone who might be more highbrow like Woody Allen would be dismissive of it. But I don't know if what I'm saying is a complete explanation of why a highly intellectual individual would concentrate the entirety of his being into one strenuous thought and still not arrive at the conclusion of truth and have a God relationship. And something, while you were talking, and if I may interject something here that I used from another seminar, I've been doing this seminar series with Sophie LaCour on Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And Huxley got very confessional in this book called Ends and Means. And Bob, if it's okay, do you mind if I read a passage from it that I think will be enlightening? I would enjoy it. Yeah, and Huxley essentially confessed why he never made the move to Christianity, and I think it will shine some light on why people end up in that tail-chasing mode. And he wrote, "I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning, and consequently assumed that it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. He is also concerned to prove that there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do. For myself, as no doubt for most of my friends, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom. The supporters of this system claimed that it embodied the meaning, the Christian meaning they insisted of the world. There was one admirably simple method of confuting these people and justifying ourselves in our erotic revolt. We would deny that the world had any meaning whatever." And I really have to applaud Huxley for his intellectual honesty here, but essentially he says that he doesn't make that move to Christianity because he was, I mean, to be honest, too interested in mystical drug experiences and sex. It was selfishness that motivated the incompleteness of that strenuous move of thinking one thought. And I just have to, I don't admire the movements of his mind. I wish that he was able to divest himself of this nihilistic hedonism, and I hope maybe on his deathbed or somewhere else he found God. But at least he came out and said it.
Well, that's great. That's really interesting. You've touched on something that is very difficult to explain, at least for me and my experiences. This is where my faith, my philosophy, and my theology collide on this issue. I'll share with you one of my most innermost thoughts on this is that we look for meaning in the world, and I hear this a lot, and they find no meaning in the world. People can't find God in the world or any meaning in the world. My belief is it doesn't exist in the world. They're looking for meaning in the world separate from whom they are. Meaning is only perceivable through our being. So we have to participate in the meaning of the world.
Yes.
So the meaning is really found when we become somehow in a union with the world. And I don't mean joining the world in the sense of sinfulness and that. I mean, where we can see God, we have to become a participant in that meaning. We have to let the meaning come through our senses. So we have all the equipment, so to speak, to perceive the meaning of God. But we have to use that equipment in order to perceive the meaning. The meaning is in us. God gives us that sense of meaning through our participation in life, in living, in truth. When we try to find it externally, it doesn't exist. I don't know, maybe you can put that in better words than me, but that's kind of how I've seen it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've long contended that meaning is something that an individual makes, right? So then now I've been on sort of both sides of this. I've been in a situation where my God relationship was weaker than it is now and got a great deal out of meaning out of the different artistic projects that I was engaged in. So an individual might be said... an agnostic individual might say to you and I, completely agree, meaning just isn't out there objectively in the world. It's something that you have to make as a result of your own virtuous activity. But they may say, I just don't need God in order to do this. And they're like, I get a great deal of meaning just by serving the poor or taking care of my children or, loving my friends or making jewelry, whatever it is whatever activity it is that gives them meaning. So, and I think this kind of gets into the next part of what Kierkegaard is going to be talking about here is the sustainability of those projects without God, right? Is it ultimately going to lead to sort of a collapse or a deceptive narcissism? So let's bracket that. Let's bracket that just for a second and view it in the context of what Kierkegaard has to say next, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So thinking one thought leads to self-renunciation, ideally, which in turn leads to the discovery of God. A disturbing blessed contradiction is stumbled upon. God is our all-powerful co-worker. Without God, we can do nothing. God as our co-worker allows us to do everything. When one has this realization, you are conscious of it at every moment, not just once in a while. There's a temptation here. We become God's instrument in self-renunciation. However, because God is not seen, one can mistake the power given unto the instrument as the instrument's own power. Of course, we're easily reminded of the uselessness of the instrument once the power is withdrawn. And I thought this was a really profound passage that Kierkegaard said. And I think it's true. I know many, many brilliant people who seem to be touched with a certain amount of genius, and they don't understand that comes from somewhere else. They think that's something that they just genetically won the lottery, and therefore, and it's also sort of the culmination of their own talent. And think about that in our own society, right? Think about celebrities who seem to have these preternatural gifts, right? And then think about the suicidality rate of those individuals, right? Like, they think they can just keep writing hit song after hit song after hit song, and then the well dries up. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is, would it be wrong to say to those individuals who may have countered us earlier, who said, "Oh, well, I'm an agnostic, yet I build meaning"? Could we just say, "Yeah, you're building meaning. You just don't realize that God is using you"?
Yeah.
Would that be the proper and when that capacity to make the meaning, and when it dries up, and when you're scraping to find the inspiration and blah 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 blah. Well, do we say that God has withdrawn that? And if only they had properly understood the fount of their meaning, could they have renewed it properly? Well, what would we say to such individuals, given what Kierkegaard just said there?
I think it sounds like the machine is running wild. The equipment, that a person has, the genius that a person has to understand, to perform, to perceive truth, to perceive meaning, is just kind of running under its own power, so to speak, and it thinks it's accomplishing something, but it's doing nothing but idling, kind of like a car idling in neutral. It's not getting anywhere because what it's lacking is truth. The machine itself, like the computer, can't really tell truth on its own. So unless we are synchronized with God, there's no way that just our perception can accomplish truth, can understand truth. Because everything would be relative to us. That's why in postmodernism, I think that's what we're really talking about here. Every person creates his own truth. That's like saying our machines are just, each one of us is running wild. We can do whatever we want. We can think whatever we want. Because the machinery is working, it means we're accomplishing something. But that's just not true. We have to get that machinery in gear. The only thing that can put that machinery in gear is truth. And the only absolute truth is God. That's the element of faith for the Christian anyway, is that God is the absolute truth, and we see that truth through the words of Christ. And that is how not only we perceive God, but how we perceive truth as well. So that would be my way of looking at that.
Yeah, I like this idea of the machines running wild. It sums up so many dystopian ideas. I just saw the new Blade Runner movie, so got that a little bit on the brain. I would highly recommend individuals checking it out and see if there's some applicability to what Bob just said and what Kierkegaard is talking about. So let's move on here. It's very difficult to realize we are capable of nothing on our own. If we can comprehend this, then we ought to be able to praise love without end. I find that's something very easy for me to do these days, Bob.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and hopefully what we're doing right here is a testament to that.
It is.
Everything that we're able to do here is through a power higher than ourselves. For what else sustains us, and how can we be so incorrigible as to not give praise? The best person to praise love is the one who loves God. Only he is related to God in the proper way and is truly loving. I just really love this passage about individuals who truly praise love in contradistinction to others on page 335. It's probably my favorite passages. I got lots of favorite. To be honest, I drew a great straw this week because there were so many wonderful quotations, and I don't know. Maybe my lesson's made up of a few too many quotations this week, but I just was like, you know what? I'd rather just have Kierkegaard talk than paraphrase him because he's just so poetic. But on page 335, he says, "He who praises art and science emphasizes the cleavage between the talented and untalented among men. But he who praises love equalizes all, not in a common poverty, nor in a common mediocrity, but in the community of the highest." Man, that's probably there's like a couple of the truest two sentences I've heard in a while. I mean, really think about that. Think about kind of the choice we're sort of presented with as existentialists, where we sort of stratify the world amongst who has the greater talent, who's more clever, who's more artistic, who's more powerful, who's more rich, blah, 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 blah. And then the Christian perspective where there's absolute equality. Who cares? You think you're clever? You only have that gift for a short period of time. You won't have it. You won't have it forever. You were given to it. You were given that gift for a brief moment, you little candle you, in order to accomplish a much greater end. And I just love the dichotomy that these two sentences presents. Did this passage stick out to you?
It wasn't one of the ones that I highlighted on that page, but now that you bring it,
how dare you think different? How dare you think differently than me?
But I do agree. It is, hearing you read it and talk about it, it certainly makes it more meaningful. So that's, I appreciate your bringing that up.
Good. Hopefully other people do too. Would you like to say anything else about this topic before I move on?
No, I think I'll talk about it a little bit more when we do the conclusion. So I'm kind of jotting a little note down here, but for myself. But yeah, we'll get to that and talk about that a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
Sure. When we praise love, it must be done outwardly in sacrificial disinterestedness, says Kierkegaard. In self-renunciation, we turn ourselves into nothing internally and externally. We are nothing before God, and we are never to forget what we are before God. When we compare ourselves to men and become prideful, we are suffering from an illusion. We are always before God and therefore nothing. And I really like this sentiment, Bob, because I like the idea of the inescapableness of God's eyes. I hate it. On one level, I hate it because, because I'm a sinful human being, I want to cheat.
Yeah.
Right? I want to hope that God is, that we live in this ever expanding universe and God's taking care of all these different life forms on far flung planets, and maybe for 30 seconds or whatever he won't see me when I do that sinful thing. Mm-hmm. But what Kierkegaard's saying here is, you deceive yourself if you think that. Because God's eyes are always watching you. He's always watching you. And if they're always watching you, you're always nothingness. And that's a hard message to preach to people. Because a lot of people want to lie a little here. A lot of people want to steal a little here. A lot of people want to commit sexual immorality here. God can't possibly be keeping tabs on me. And it's just the hard and disagreeable truth that it's probably not the case.
If I can just interject something here as you were talking.
Sure.
I was talking about praising. Praising love is kind of an interesting term that he uses here. He carries that on into the conclusion as well. And today when we think of praising God, we think of, or praising love, we think of something different than I think what Kierkegaard means here. What I think he's getting at is praising love in the sense of, is a sense of admiration. it's a sense of we have an admiration towards God, of God's qualities. But we tend to restrict those qualities to those qualities that we find palatable. So in so doing, we kind of filter God out and saying, well, I love God, but I don't love everything about God. For instance, we filter out his righteousness. We say, I love God, but I don't like his righteousness a whole lot. And for the true Christian, he must love the righteousness of God as he sees the righteousness of God in Christ. And that's why Christ was so important. People just think, okay, Jesus is just, the idol of the Christians. And, the Jews maybe think of Moses the same way, or Islam thinks of Muhammad. Absolutely not. Jesus is not the leader of Christianity. He is Christianity. He isn't in the sense that he is the righteousness of God. He personifies the righteousness and the love of God. So when we say that we praise love, we praise God's love for us, that means we praise Christ. We not only do we admire Christ, but we admire everything about him. And I'll get into that just a little bit more, but that thought kind of came to me as you were speaking, that I thought I would bring it up at this point anyway.
Yeah, I think for me personally, when I talk about praising love and praising Christ and praising God, in order for that to not sound like some sort of vacuous sort of incantation that one does at a church tent revival meeting, what I think that ultimately means is that just God dying for my sins, because I know just how problematic a person I am. Mm-hmm. And how I'll never ever be good enough, from an ethico-religious perspective. Now, I find it interesting that Kierkegaard doesn't come out and say this. That's what Luke and Bob are saying, right? Like Luke and Bob are talking about the blood atonement. Luke and Bob are talking about righteousness and judgment and things like that. I love Kierkegaard. I've gone so deep into my Christian faith, though sometimes I just feel like he's got kids gloves on. I really want him to say what he means. I know that's what he wants to say. I'm like, why are we dancing around it here? But I also know, in my experience with human beings, is that they can't handle the truth. That scene from what was it? A Few Good Men, where Jack Nicholson?
Yeah.
Nicholas? What's the name of the actor? Nicholson. He's like, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. The truth of the matter is, people can't handle direct answers. They don't want to know the truth. And you kind of have to be vague and cryptic in order to work on their subconscious, so eventually they figure it out. You can't talk directly to people. And that's what, Bob and I were talking earlier about the next book we're going to cover, which is Kierkegaard's My Point of View as an Author. I'm probably butchering the title, but Kierkegaard's probably going to talk about those issues, about why he couldn't just directly come out and say things, and why he had to use different characters and different methods, because people scare so easily when you tell them the gospel truth.
Do you think it's also because, had he written about the atonement, people would have said, he's just a Christian author, and this is just another Christian book, and people wouldn't pick it up to read it. But the way he wrote it, non-Christians are willing to read this book and hopefully be led to the proper thoughts that are prerequisites to conversion. So he appeals in a sense, to a wider audience by not limiting himself to just being another Christian author. Do you think that's a possibility here?
Yeah, maybe. The thing is like with the time that he was living, especially where he was, everyone was an air quotes Christian.
Yeah.
Right? So it's almost like he had to have I would love to interrogate him if I could, people always ask you, like, if you could have dinner with 3 people from history, who would you have dinner with? And if I could have dinner with Kierkegaard, I almost want to know if there was like a prophetic streak in him, if he knew that there was going to be this great apostasy, this great falling away, and that he could anticipate the drive towards agnosticism, atheism, and nihilism, and that would be the generation that he would be talking to rather than one he was contemporaneous with. I almost wonder if he was a seer in that respect, because the dude read the Bible all the time. It's prophesied that the great falling away would happen. He saw industrialization happen to a certain degree, that he knew people would become too comfortable to dig into matters, and he could see the menacing threat of Hegelian philosophy and how it was ultimately going to culminate in sort of apotheosis of the individual, right? Where they're channeling the Hegelian dialectic. So, he could anticipate these things. I just wonder how far off into the future
I think in my readings of him, I think he saw his present age, his present religious age, and in that age, he saw the seeds of what was going to happen. He could tell, if we continue to do this, this is going to be the result. And I think he saw the future in the sense that he looked at the seeds and says, well, I think I know where this is going to lead. Yeah.
Oh, he was just a silly alarmist.
Yeah.
We shouldn't take him seriously. Those people are to be marginalized. They're on the fringe. Everything in the future will be dreamy and perfect. Just hand it over to us, your world controllers. Robots. It's a great idea. And universal income for everyone. All right.
I think computer implants is going to make our lives so much easier.
Bob, take that back. Take that back. You know what Revelation 13 says. Ain't nobody chipping me. All right.
Mean you're not a chip off the old block, huh?
No, not off that. All right. Again, outward sacrificial disinterestedness is the mode of those in truth praising love. This is how you can tell the proclaimer of truth is not attempting to deceive you. All sorts of deception, boy don't I know it, can be proclaimed in order to gain worldly advantage. Oh man. But this is not love. Loving the truth means willing to proclaim the truth without the slightest regret of sacrifice. You've got to be ready for such a task because the world is totally rotten. And I love this quote from Kierkegaard on page 336. Essentially, the truth must be regarded as polemic in this world. And boy, does that resonate with me. You mentioned truth seekers. Mm-hmm. You know what? And there's a very small group of people in this world right now who are trying to tell the truth. And they are castigated as yahoos and alarmists and I guess the buzzword of the day is fake news and conspiracy theorists and things like that. But there's a lot of people trying to tell the truth, and there's a lot of pushback against that. And I just think that Kierkegaard hit the nail right on the head. Essentially, the truth must be regarded as polemic in this world. And I don't know, you probably don't agree with me on this, but the way that I look at it is, if someone tells me not to listen to someone, or to not read a certain book, or to not take something seriously, my new motto at age 37 is those are going to be the first things that I look into. So if people ridicule the Bible and talk about it as being something outdated and something for religious zealots or whatever, well, guess what? I'm going to read it cover to cover. And plenty of other books too. But I think if you really want, I'm becoming more around to the position, if you really want to understand the nature of reality, you have to read the books that you're not allowed to read.
It is polemical because when you confront somebody with the truth, you're going to get that pushback, and it's going to be offensive to some people because what they believe in, Luke, is very comfortable. They've created this illusion, and it's very comfortable. And when you go to present to them and say to them that you've been living a lie, you've been living a make-believe world, and this is the truth, and confront it, it's a confrontation. They resist it because they don't want to get up off the comfortable couch. They don't want to get out of bed. They're comfortable where they're at. The world is just humming the way it's supposed to be. Everything is fine. And you're asking them to change. You're asking them, number one, to admit that they are wrong. To admit that what they have is not the truth. And that's the most difficult thing to do. So yes, it is polemical.
Yeah. And Kierkegaard takes that up in his diagnosis of how people treat the present, and we'll get there momentarily. You have to not care about the approval of men, only how God views you. And we are interested in winning men for God, but not for ourselves. We must keep men at a distance, so that we do not become an idol, and all glory is directed towards God. And in this process, we expose ourselves to mockery and run the risk of martyrdom for their sake. Sometimes, the very people that we want to help are the ones that lash out against us. Kierkegaard bemoans how important this is because in his time, and it has only gotten worse, the present moment has been elevated over eternity. I can't even count the times I've been implored to live in the moment, to follow your bliss. Right? Many are in proud ignorance of God and the truth, believing they are in possession of all the truth available. Kierkegaard remarks, the time of the thinker has passed. Everyone is so wrapped up in the moment, they cannot contemplate God. Man has become the measure of everything, and men have such a superficial understanding of things. They only wish, he's talking about university lecturers here, to appear clever to a crowd for an hour or so, whilst delivering a lecture. And this is another one of my favorite passages. I'm going to just read it straight, page 338 to 339 of the Harper Torch Books edition. Especially the first line. Man, this really... God, I really love this first line. Thus, in our time, all are the wise. Only here and there is a solitary one who is a fool. The world is so close to having achieved perfection that now all are the wise. If there were not the individual eccentrics and fools, the world would be completely perfect. Amid all this, God sits as it were in heaven and waits. No one longs to be away from this noise and tumult of the moment in order to find the quiet wherein God dwells. Although men and admire God because he is like all the rest, no one is longing after the standard of the eternal disdains this cheap succession from the highest. Such is the importance the immediate moment has come to have in itself. And it's passages like that and the ones above that make me want to be a writer. I mean... Thus, in our time, all are the wise. Only here and there is a solitary one who is a fool. The world is so close to having achieved perfection that now all are the wise. If there were not the individual eccentrics and fools, the world would be completely perfect. Man, that's just gold. That's literary gold right there. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, that's the kind of a verse you need to read over and over again, I think, in order to extract it. It's a beautiful quotation, and it's funny how Kierkegaard writes so very much, and even in this one book, Works of Love, he just writes so many words, and yet poetry, if I can call it poetry, still jumps out. He still is careful enough to create such an artistry in his words. He never stops weaving words. Maybe he just gets better at it the more he writes. But for me, it would take me months to come up with anything even remotely as clever as that. But he just falls right off his pen, like he's sitting there and it's just part of his writing. So I have to say that's beautiful.
I've started to try to write a little bit lately, and I don't claim to be anything like Kierkegaard. And I never really desired to do any sort of expository or creative writing or anything like that. And I have no idea if I'm any good at it or not. Time will tell. But you got to be inspired. And it's moments like that when you can see the agony within Kierkegaard and how it shoots through the pen. And it culminates in this beautiful poetic expression. And just to come up with a conclusion like that, I mean, it just really shows how many founts that Kierkegaard was drinking from and how he sort of recombined everything in order to have this flash of brilliant insight. So I think that's sort of lost on us when we think about how Kierkegaard constructed his sentences. I'd like to know, I would like to know a little bit more about his personal habits, just, how much he was actually imbibing before he wrote, or if he just kind of did all his education and then just stopped reading and then just wrote. I think that'd be interesting to find out. So we have to give up the present moment in self-renunciation if we are to be true lovers. This world crucified love, so even if crucifixion doesn't happen to us today, the world can still persecute in new and perhaps pettier ways. Trust me, it does. I used to think that was some sort of paranoia that Christians always talked about how they were persecuted in America or something like that. Like the war on Christmas or whatever. Yeah. But seeing what I see now, Bob, and maybe you can elaborate on this, like for born-again Christians, there is serious persecution going on, but it's not like what I thought it was. And, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the world will never understand how love of God is connected to the hatred of the world. And I just want to pause for a second there. I mean, do you feel as a Christian that you're persecuted in this today? I mean, it's not like we're getting beheaded or crucified, but do you ever experience any sort of persecution? Or do you feel like everything's just kind of okay? Because the way I look at it is that there's a false sense of security amongst the church. Is that there's been a hands-off approach, but there's been sort of a unknowing persecution that they're not even aware of. I don't know how to say this. There's a subconscious persecution that the church isn't even aware of. Because I think the adversary learned that if you overtly persecute, you turn people into examples, and that only inspires more fanatical commitment to Christianity. But if you could make the persecution so subliminal and below the level of consciousness that the person themselves doesn't even realize they're being persecuted, and the faith itself doesn't even realize it's being persecuted, you could actually destroy the faith without having any of the martyrs. And you know what? That makes me want to slow clap to the adversary, because that's a really brilliant move, Satan.
Oh yeah.
To make it so that the church could be persecuted in a way they can't even acknowledge.
Yeah. In answer to your question about persecution, I see it a little differently. I don't even want to. I see it applied a little differently in my life than perhaps in other people's lives. People in my neighborhood are not walking up the block with flaming torches, trying to chase me out of town or anything like that. I find a lot of people in the world are friendly towards me. I get along with anybody that I possibly can. Paul says, try to live at peace with everybody. I really try to put that into practice. what I find and what I think, though, is I'm not really worried about me anymore. I don't really focus on whether I'm persecuted or not. What I see more clearly is how Christ is still persecuted. That Christ is still persecuted externally and internally by, as we'll see in the next section, by purposely misunderstanding him, by perpetrating or perpetuating this misunderstanding, turning him into something that he's not, changing him into something palatable for the world, to me right. is obnoxious. And just to think how our Savior sees that going on today, to me, that's a different kind of persecution. But like Paul says, in a way, they're nailing him to the cross all over again. And right. So I don't really worry about myself and being persecuted. If they do, that for me, that's a glorious thing. That there is a persecution, but it's like you say, persecution has for us in this country, okay, which is a whole lot different than some poor Christians have to live with in outright physical persecution. I don't deal with that. I don't have people, like I say, trying to capture me and throw me into prison because I'm speaking about Jesus. I don't have to worry about that. So I would be ashamed to say whatever I have is persecution. I don't even want to put it in the same category of what those other people have to live through. But the persecution for me comes in the form of disinterest, false interest, I'm trying to think of what the right word is. Placation, is that a word? To placate me, to just kind of like pat me on the head and say, "Oh, you teach about the Bible. Oh, isn't that nice?" For me, that's torture to hear that, because I'm trying to make a difference. I'm trying to preach truth. I'm trying to motivate people, and for them to pat me on the head and say, "Oh, isn't that nice what you're doing?" That undermines my whole ministry, So my persecution is a little different, and I'm embarrassed to even put it in that category. But that's my experiences anyway.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways, right? Is that is like you said, that there is something dehumanizing. There's something about the society that dehumanizes people who who take the Bible seriously. Mm-hmm. They may be perfectly nice to us, but they may treat us like pets. To pat you on the head. That's a good way to put it. So right, you're not being nailed to a cross, but you are being I don't know, spoken to in sort of a diminutive fashion. So I think that's one of, there's a lot of weapons that are at work here, and I think that's one of them. So I mean, I think it presents a great challenge, right? And I think that's what's so great about what Kierkegaard's works do, is that if anyone were ever to do that to me, I say, no, listen, I'm actually a further like if anyone were ever to sort of treat me like that, I would have to try. My response would be, is like, no, listen, like, I'm actually a further development and intensification of what it means to be a person, not a degradation of a person as a result of my relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay? And I don't know. I recoil a little bit. I hate hearing that something like that happens to you, so I get a little bit vicariously or defensive or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't like the idea of Christians being stereotyped into Ned Maud Flanders. I don't know if you know the show The Simpsons, but there's a stereotypical Christian family on there, and they're kind of a running joke. So I don't care too much for that. Anywho, so moving on. Again, in order to truly praise love, the relationship between men must be one of disinterestedness. I think we've talked about that in other places. I think that kind of makes sense. I think the idea is to not to develop bonds with other human beings that are so intense that they take the role of the God relationship. As a Christian, it actually freaks me out a little bit if people want to hang around me too much. I'm just like, don't hang out with me. Go read your Bible. Because like, oh man, I don't want people's source of meaning and religious mindset or anything like that to be predicated on our relationship. I want them to go and do it for themselves. It was interesting. You're talking about persecution and stuff like that. There's a lot of false Christs and stuff like that popping up around the world right now. There's like a guy in Russia who's claiming to be the reincarnation of Christ, and he gets like thousands of people to go visit him in the desert every day.
Oh.
And there's this other guy. I don't know. I think he's Eastern European or whatever, but all he does is stare. He doesn't say any words, but multitudes of people like pay lots of money and show up just to see him get up on stage and gaze into his eyes.
I thought we call that.
He doesn't.
Yeah, isn't that called catatonia?
I don't. Oh my God. Sorry, I'm taking the Lord's name in vain, but and then also in terms of false Christ, I don't know if you heard about this, but they found I'm gonna put this air quotes. They found a long lost painting of Leonardo da Vinci's, and it's Christ, and in this painting of Christ, he looks very feminine, and he's doing the as above so below esoteric hand sign. And to the cherry on top is that he's holding a crystal ball, Bob. So you'll be hearing about this, but a new Leonardo da Vinci painting has been found, and I'm not going to talk about the feminizing of Christ or the esoteric hand symbols or anything like that, but I'm just going to tell you, in this, I'll send it to you, in this newly discovered picture of painting of Christ that's going to be going around to every museum in the world as it goes on tour this year or next. Christ is holding a crystal ball. Can you believe that?
I'm sorry to say, yes, I can believe that they think that exists, but I would almost expect anything in our generation, Luke. It's hard to surprise us anymore.
I just couldn't. I'm not going to comment anymore on that. All right, I think because I'll sound like a crazy person.
Yeah, please send me that picture. I have to see that picture there. That'll be interesting.
It'll make your blood boil if you start to pay attention to the details. Anyway, let me finish up here so I don't get myself into any more trouble.
Yes,
okay, Bob? Don't you understand why I have to have a script? Because then I'll start talking about stuff like this. All right. Even Socrates didn't know about truly loving the ugly neighbor. It goes against all inclination and passion. And so I'll close things out with this last passage from page 343. Consequently, in order to be able to praise love, there is need for inward self-denial and outward sacrificial disinterestedness. If then one undertakes to praise love and is asked if it really is out of love on his part that he does it, the answer must be, no other person can decide this accurately. Possibly it is vanity, pride, and short of evil, but it is also possible that it is love. And so concludes my discussion of works of love. And I'm going to find a picture of the new Da Vinci Christ for Bob and let him talk about the conclusion.
Well, thank you, Luke. Mighty fine job you did. And just for the listeners out there, just because Luke and I are doing this in one session doesn't mean you don't have the freedom to stop it now and then restart it again if this is a little long. Because this is probably going to be a little lengthier than our normal podcasts, but we would like to kind of wrap it up today. So without further ado, let me get into the so-called conclusion. And as I was discussing with you, Luke, earlier, this is not exactly what I expected as a conclusion. I kind of almost, I should have known better, but I almost expected him to take all the loose ends and put them into nice little bows. That's not exactly what happened here on this in this segment here. But let me get into it and we can decide and talk about that a little later. So he talks about that in previous chapters that his desire was to praise love. We talked a little bit about praising love as to it could be a wide range of anything to praising one quality of God to praising all the qualities of God. But now he's going to introduce a little bit about John the Apostle. It's hard to talk about love, Luke, without not including John. John's gospel was about love, but if you've ever read the 3 letters of John, at least the first 2 letters, you'll find John was a gospel just steeped in love, but a very righteous love. He says, "Beloved, let us love one another." These words have apostolic authority. It was said by one who was perfected in love. So John has this reputation of being perfected in love. This is not a command to love, like you shall or you must love, but something that is supposed to come naturally. These words are transfiguring or transforming. They do change us. We were talking about last week about the power of words. This is something I think we have to discover on our own. This isn't an intellectual thing. It's not intellectually understanding love. It's loving. It's learning how to love, not what the word means. And that's what Kierkegaard's writings are all about. That's what existentialists are supposed to be all about. It's about being and not thinking. So we have to somehow make that jump that barrier here and let Kierkegaard help us to do that. He says, what would hinder us from loving? As Christians, we shouldn't need to be commanded to love. It's not like, okay, I'm a Christian, what am I supposed to do now? Okay, love. Okay, now I got to really work at this love thing here. This isn't the way Christianity is supposed to be. Christianity is a belief, a faith of being. In other words, when you become a Christian, you love because you're a Christian. You don't love in order to become a Christian, but you love because you're a Christian. It's a necessity of our relationship with God to love. It's the only true sign that we're a Christian. And this is where a lot of us kind of miss the boat sometimes. But let me read from 1 John chapter 3, verse 23 and 4. It says, "And this is his commandment, that we should believe on the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, as he gave us commandment. And he that keepeth his commandments dwelleth in him, and he in him. And thereby we know that he abideth in us, by the Spirit which he hath given us." So we become one with the commandment of loving, but the idea of love has become very distorted today. So love here, in John's eyes, is the litmus test of whether you're a Christian or not. And in Kierkegaard's eyes as well. If you don't love, you can't claim to be a Christian. So if you're a Christian, you must love, not as a commandment, but as evidence that you're a Christian. It's something of being that's been altered in you. You become that new creation Paul is talking about. You're not the old creation anymore. You have the person of Christ in you. You've given up the old person. But he says that his society, and again, thinking of that as the seeds of our society, he says that it's turned love into some kind of flirtative love, in my words, hippie love. We act as though we only need to be hearers of the word and not doers of the word. Again, he's telling us that this isn't an intellectual, being a Christian is not an intellectual theology that one adapts or accepts purely with the mind or the brain, but rather one accepts with the very being of a person. Again, let me quote 1 John chapter 2, verse 10 and 11. He that loveth his brother abides in the light, and there is no occasion of stumbling in him. And he that hateth his brother is in darkness, and walks in darkness, and knows not where he goes, because that darkness has blinded his eyes. This is such a wonderful, meaningful verse worth memorizing, that loving our brother does not create an occasion of stumbling in us. So if we say we love our brother but actually hate him, then we walk in darkness. And Kierkegaard goes on here with this little different twist here on the Old Testament. He says, only one thing more, because Kierkegaard is famous for that. That's like being on the flight and the pilot saying, okay, we're going to have a 15-minute delay. Right away it's going to be maybe an hour. Well, it's the same thing. Kierkegaard says, one more last thing. Take it for what it's worth. The Christian, like for like, or what we call the lex talionis, the law of retaliation or retribution, is what he's going to talk about here. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He's saying, okay, what's the Christian version of this? He says, one often wonders how the law fits into Christianity. We'll see that the law was a prelude to grace. And in my own words, what I say is, without the law, there can be no grace, for there must first be an offense. We talk about God's grace and how can it possibly exist. Look at the Old Testament. It's filled with laws and regulations. And look at Jesus. He's full of grace. How can the two complement one another? And my answer is they have to complement one another. You can't have grace if you don't have offense. How can you have forgiveness if you haven't broken the law? So as Paul says, the law is there to teach us that we need grace. It's there to teach us that we've broken it. Okay? A lot of times Christianity is taught about love as a coddling love, he says. And this is what I call, and other people I think have picked up the phrase, a hallmark Christianity. The kind of Christianity that you read about on greeting cards, Christmas cards, Easter cards, funeral cards, all these wonderful little aphorisms that speak about Christ. And this is a lot of times, this is all that we hear in church too. We're not confronted by God in churches anymore much. There's a need for this kind of love, of course. There's a need for the hallmark love. There's a need for peace and for consolation and that kind of love, absolutely. But not so that it overwhelms God's righteous love. It's not either or, as Kierkegaard would say. Here, it's both in this case. God's love becomes a fanciful and childish conception. This is how the true gospel message, which is confrontational and a stumbling block to the Jews, is neutralized. So earlier I was talking about adding to the spikes in Christ, re-crucifying Jesus. This is how it's done. It's done by neutralizing the gospel, by saying, oh yeah, Jesus was a wonderful Messiah, but there's other ways to heaven. There's other ways, okay? Trying to neutralize the confrontational value of Jesus. That's re-crucifying him all over again. So Christianity, though, he says, has abandoned this like for like of the Jews and replaced it with a Christian like for like. But here he's getting into a good sense of the term. This is not the church in general. This is Kierkegaard's idea of how have Christians taken the proper way to take the like for like or the lex talionis and look at it in the Christian manner. Christianity turns away from the external and into the internal and makes our relationship to others into a God relationship. He talks about how God educates us. And this is kind of, he gives us he speaks about this at more length here, but he talks about when you're in school and the teacher always wants your attention. Okay, class, look up front, right? And if you don't look up front, you hopefully he'll humiliate you, or in the old days they would humiliate you, put you in the closet, do something, because the teacher wanted your attention. It's a good thing I didn't go to a parochial school, Luke. My hands would be right now filled with arthritis from being hit so many times with the ruler. But that's what they used to do in my day. My friends went through parochial school and got that kind of treatment. If you don't look, yeah.
It's always whenever you tell me these stories, it's always hard for me to imagine you as a hellraiser.
No, it wasn't.
But you must have been a bad boy, Bob Schut.
I wasn't a hellraiser. I was just inattentive. My mind was somewhere completely out of the classroom. That's my problem. I always had wandering thoughts and my ideas. I just couldn't focus on what they wanted me to learn. It says, a child who's educated imagines his relationship with his comrades in his little world as the true reality. And that's kind of where I was. I had my own reality, and it just wasn't in the classroom's reality. It wasn't the teacher's reality. But it's up to the teacher to teach him that this reality isn't so. This isn't real. This is just a reality for the sake of instruction. So when we go to school, we're put in a different reality. This is just a temporary reality. This is something that people have a hard time understanding. They go to school, they get their graduate high school, then they go to college and they get their 4-year degree, then their master's, and then like you go on to get your PhD. But in some cases, if you've never done anything but go to school, you've grown up in this educational reality where you think this is the world, the real world. Then when you go out and you try to get employment, all of a sudden you find it's not the way they taught you in school. Okay? Getting an A doesn't mean you're going to go on to the next class. You may have the guy who gets a C is the one who's promoted over the one who gets the A. All sorts of things happen in reality that aren't really true in high school and even in secondary schools. Did you notice that, or am I giving you something you've never understood before, Luke?
Oh, well, no, I figured that a long time ago. That's why I had to start my own company. I'm totally unemployable in other respects. But, I think there's a lot of truth in it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Absolutely right.
And the deeper I dig, connections
or
are
who
everything.
you're related to.
Mm-hmm. But I will also say that I mean, what the university channels individuals into, which is sort of the purity of the liberal arts, is not something that's rewarded by 21st century capitalism.
True.
And it's not something that's largely respected in industry, and it's not something, to be honest, that's respected by those university systems themselves. Mm-hmm. You can just look at a university and how it allocates its resources. You can. A lot of major public universities will pay a football coach for $4 million. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, your adjunct teaching professors are making something like $22,000 a year. So perhaps So are we going to keep accepting that? And the fact of the matter is, unless people create new models, nothing's going to change it, unless something disruptive were to come along. Mm-hmm. Would be a shame if that happened.
Yeah. Well, money is rewarded with money. Can you create money for me? Can you make money for me? Do you have a talent that can earn me money? That's the magical question that corporations ask. And unfortunately, some people have gone to school studying things that they really enjoy, they really love, and they get a 4-year degree in it, and they find it's almost worthless out in the real world, So.
Well, it may secure you some sort. It's like, if you're like this real hot shot person in philosophy, and you go into the corporate world, an employer may say, "Hey, you're a hot shot. You were a hot shot there. Maybe you could be a hot shot here." But then in all likelihood, you're going to have to like stop doing philosophy and like, I don't know, like get into, I don't know, managerial structures.
Either that, or or they're going to ask you to use your philosophy to deceive people. In commercials, in the commercial world, how can we deceive these people?
Bob, that sounds real conspiratorial.
I take it
there.
back.
I don't know. I just don't know if that's a really appropriate thing to be discussing.
Maybe not.
I mean, come on. Do you think advertisers would ever be untruthful?
I better take that back, because we may be, 5 years from now, we may be sponsored by Colgate or somebody. So I better take that back, right?
I know. I'll get Diet Coke tattooed on my forehead. Just give me a little money, system.
It says, God has willed to save the world, and that to some who don't accept God creates a certain rigor. I was trying to think, I'm not really positive I know what the word rigor means here, so I had to look it up, I'll be honest with you. And the different versions I got it means exhaustive, strictly applied, inflexible, harsh, or rigid. So rigor here, I think he's meaning something harsh and rigid, inflexible, more in that area here as he uses it. We have to relate ourselves to God in all things, he tells us. This relationship is both mild and rigorous. So this is where it comes into play. He's saying, we talk about this like for like, and it comes in two forms. He says it comes in a mild form and in a rigorous form. God's word of salvation has both mildness and rigor to it, meaning like a gentleness and a harshness. He tells us that the centurion, from Matthew chapter 18, verse 13, which I'll read in a minute, he tells us that the centurion was told, "Be it done for you as you believe." So there's a certain amount of subjectivism here. So in Matthew 8, verse 13, it says, "And Jesus said unto the centurion, Go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee. And his servant was healed in the selfsame hour." So this idea of be it done for you as you believe. It could be mild, but it could also be compassionate, and it can be harsh. So he's going into now, how can this be taken here? Different ways. Faith is something internal, and we must examine ourselves. We have to examine our faith. And this is really important. And I'll get to it in a minute, but this is something I constantly do, examine my faith. And I would say it's something that all Christians ought to do. Don't just take it for granted you're faithful because, I better wait for a minute because he gets into this and I don't want to spoil his thunder. So let me continue. When we do evaluate our faith, sometimes it appears rigorous and strict, especially when we're in a doubting sense of our faith. So sometimes we're going to be very harsh on ourselves, as I am. I sometimes have to admit, sometimes I'm very harsh on myself. And for me, it's very rigorous, very strict as to what I consider faith. When we say, on the other hand, of course I have faith because I've been baptized and I've received communion. What more evidence do you want that I have faith? But Christianity would answer, be it done as you believe. This would force us to an internal meditation. So the idea here is, can we depend upon the fact that we were baptized and that we received communion and that perhaps the priest or the pastor blessed us and said, "Oh, son, you have great faith." Oh, okay, I guess I have great faith then. Is that good enough? Well, Kierkegaard says, no, it's not. He wants you to internalize faith and look at yourself in a different manner. And he says, one of the ways is, think of this word, be it done as you believe. Okay. For the centurion, forget, he wasn't baptized by this time, and he didn't receive communion. So how could he have faith? How could he be a man of great faith? He didn't have all the rituals to give evidence of his faith. He had only words to give to Jesus. But yet Jesus was able to see his faith. Okay, on page 347, he speaks about security in his day as it is in ours. I'm sure you highlighted this one, Luke. I'm sure you highlighted this in red. Page 347. He says here, but in these times, when in social political relationships, there is so much talk about security and security, men finally extend this into Christianity and let baptism be their security, which it certainly is, if you really believe that it is the security of, be it done for you as you believe. So in here, in this little paragraph, he captures the whole essence of what he's trying to say, that where do we find security in our faith? What can we tell ourselves to make us feel good about our faith? And he says, many people say, well, I was baptized. I've got a certificate somewhere that says I was baptized. So I should put that up on my wall to remind me that I have faith. Kierkegaard said, that's not evidence of faith. He says, it's certain that it will be done for you as you believe. That's the comment. But the certainty of our faith that we believe, we have to win at every moment with God's help. Oh, this is so good to hear that somebody else understands that. Go ahead.
Well, I like I know what's coming here because obviously I read the entire book, and the conclusion recently. And I want to plant the seed because I'm curious about what you think, because Kierkegaard's going to go on to talk about the nature of forgiveness and wrath in terms of how we extend that to other individuals. It's a beautiful way of articulating the concept, but when you get to it, I want you to elaborate on whether or not that's theologically correct, because that was something that came to mind as I was reading it. But you and I know what I'm talking about. The people that are listening probably don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to step back from that.
I did discover a flaw, and I'm not sure if it's the same flaw, but I'll wait till I get to it. To believe that you're saved at baptism, you must have God beside you to hear witness to that. And the same thing is in communion. The pastor has no right to declare one way or another about your faith. So we shouldn't rest in the idea that we've done something, therefore we have faith. Faith isn't something given to us once and for all. Faith is something that we live every day, every moment, he says, we live in faith. We need to therefore examine ourselves to see whether we're still in that moment of faith. Because faith, in the sense, is a moment, but it's in an eternal moment, an infinite moment. Not like the moment that he talked about earlier when you were discussing living in the moment. This is a moment of eternity. So our faith being eternal has to exist constantly. We have to remain in faith. When we strive for faith, we get tried every day. But the gospel is not like the law. Now he makes a distinction between like for like. The gospel is not like the law. The gospel does not save you with the same rigor, but with mildness. So, what was the rigor that the law saved you with? Well, judgment. The law brought judgment. It brought the need for sacrificial events like offering animals, cleanliness rites, visiting the temple, celebrating particular holidays. All these things were necessary. And this is what he means by that rigor That strictness, that sternness, that inflexibility of God was shown in the law. But in Christianity, we have a mildness that God shows the same thing, but he shows like for like, but he shows it in a milder way. The like for like holds true in Christianity, but it takes a different form. It is forgive, and you will be forgiven. Under the law, if you were struck, you had the right to strike back. Almost an obligation to strike back. If someone pokes out your eye, you poke out their eye. Like for like. Lex talionis, okay? You had that right to strike back. But here Jesus turns it around. And he says, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other cheek. So it's like for like, but in a different like. You have to forgive the one who strikes you if you want to be forgiven. Okay. If you forgive your enemy wholeheartedly, God will see it. And as you forgive, you will be forgiven. That's the like for like. Of course, in my own words here, of course, now you can imitate Christianity by forcing yourself to forgive someone. Somebody does something to you, you can say, man, I hate this guy with all my heart, but the Bible says I have to forgive him, so damn it, I'm going to forgive you. Yeah, that's not Christianity. You can't force yourself to forgive. You forgive because forgiveness is in you. Forgiveness is part of you. You can't not forgive. And this is so hard to explain. You have to stop yourself from forgiving somebody because God is in you, wanting to forgive everybody. If you want to know if you have authentic faith, then you'll forgive without force. If you can't, then you're deceiving yourself. And if you can't, then you must repent and ask God for more faith. So even there, God says to us, okay, Bob, if you can't forgive, I understand. But don't make me partner in it. This is what we'll get to in a little while. Don't make me partners with this. Don't claim that you have faith if you can't forgive your brother. Confess it as a sin. Then we can maintain our relationship and I can help you. But if you think this is faith, you're deceiving yourself because it isn't. To believe that you're forgiven, even if you don't forgive, is also a deception, he says. We're related to God in all things, not just to the individual. So he says something here which is kind of neat here. He says, we desire sometimes to have a private relationship with God. But Kierkegaard says that we can't have such a relationship with God in the same sense that we have one with a judge. So a lot of people say, oh, God is my friend, and I have these conversations with God, and he's my buddy. Kierkegaard says this is very questionable. It's not that we can't have an intimate relationship with God. That's not what he's saying. But we can't take God apart from being God. God doesn't stop being God and become our friend. So it's not like we can say to God, oh, yeah, God, and I've got this sin that I'm committing right now. The heck, you understand. You know what it's like. Because you're my buddy. You can overlook it. He says, no, that's not how it works. You can't take a judge and say to a judge, yeah, judge, I'm guilty of this crime that I committed, and this is where I hid the evidence, but you're my friend. The judge is going to say to you, well, maybe I'm supposed to be your friend, but you've committed a crime, and I'm a judge, and I have to act like a judge. So it's the same thing with God. You can't just take God aside and say, hey, God, step down from your throne, and don't be God for a little while. Let's just be my buddy here, and I'm going to confide in you. Okay? That's not how it works.
You just made my nights a lot more sleepless, Bob.
That's what I do, Luke. That's what I do.
I know.
That's why I have very, very few friends.
I hate and love what you just said because I think it forcefully articulates the reality of this situation and whatever loophole I probably had designed for myself is gone.
All right, that's what I do, Luke. We cannot confess that we're breaking the law to a judge without him taking actions against us, and we can't treat God as a friend as though he were not God. If you can't forgive your enemy, he says, you don't have a partner in God, as though he will ignore it. It must be confessed to him as God. We cannot make God a partner in our sin. That's my words. But I think that's what he's saying here. If you think that you can take God aside and talk about your sinning with him, you're making him a partner to your sin. You can't do that, and you won't do that. You won't make Christ a partner to your sin. I don't care how liberal you are or what books you write or what books you read, Christ will not become a partner in your evil. He talks about this like for like being so rigorous that it forms an inequality at times. He brings us the saying of Jesus where we're told that we cannot see the speck in our brother's eye without seeing the log in our own. Every time I teach this in Matthew, I feel like nobody's getting it. They just don't understand this verse here. And it is a very difficult verse. So people say, do not judge lest you be judged. So I'm not going to do anything to judge anybody, because then I'm in danger of being judged, and God forbid that I be judged. So I'm willing to tolerate everything. I'm willing to put up with all the liberal thoughts. I'm going to be the gospel of inclusion. I'm going to include everybody in the gospel, because far be it from me to be a judge. This is what I hear, actually. This is not my own words. But this gives us a little better insight into what he means here. Okay? We are not forbidden to judge, since in the next paragraph in Matthew, we're told that we have to watch out for wolves in lamb's clothing and not to throw pearls before swine. Both require judgment. We are, however, not to focus upon the smallest insignificant errors of our brother, while we make great big ones ourselves. Judging others can cause us to focus upon others as a diversion of self-incrimination. So what is the lesson that Jesus is teaching here is don't focus on the little tiny sins of your brother when you're committing huge sins. That's the underlying message here. Okay, so hopefully maybe this will echo out into the Ethernet and somebody will get it. So by seeing the speck in your brother's eye, he says, is tantamount to seeing the log in your own eye. But we have to be careful here. Now, this is where I'm not sure I found the flaw in his thinking, Luke. So bear with me. Okay. It seemed like what he was saying is that if you see the speck on your brother's eye, that automatically makes you guilty of seeing the log in your own eye. And I got to thinking, in logic, we have, and then maybe not everybody will understand this, but I'm trying to make it simple. If A, then B. Therefore, if A, then B. A is true, therefore B is true. That's what we call a valid and a sound argument. So if A is true, then B is true. Since A is true, then B must also be true. That's simple, valid, and sound logic. But it sounds like what Kierkegaard is saying here is if A is true, then B is true. But since B is true, therefore A must be true. And that's a fallacy. It's called confirming the consequent. We can't say that, in this case, that, I'm trying to think of a simple way to put this. Boy, now it's kind of escaped me, Luke. Do you know what I'm getting at? Do you know that this simple logic, that you can't confirm A by B? It's like if all men are...
Are you looking for
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. There was an example here.
with bachelors? Is this
Yeah,
this
I
is
think
the one that, or mortality?
Yeah, I think either one. Can you remember that example? I should have wrote it down, but I forgot.
I'll look it up real quick. We got this.
Please do, because I should have been better prepared on this. But anyway, this is it seems like what he's saying. If we see the speck in our brother's eye, then we must have a log in our own. And I'm not sure that necessarily follows logically through here. But I'll continue on while you look up that fallacy. In the Jewish idea of like for like, you should do unto others what they do unto you. So this is just merely giving the example of the law. If somebody strikes me, then I should strike them back again. So you should do unto others what they do unto you. But in the Christian version, it's do unto others what you want them to do to you. So we have an example of the rigid or the rigorous, and then the gentle or the easier version of it, the softer version of the law. In the Christian way of looking at this, we have nothing to do with what others do to us. We do not repay like for like, but preempt them by doing to them what we want them to do to us. So the law of retaliation says that we wait for somebody to do something to us, and then we act responsively to them by doing the same thing back. But in Christianity, we preempt it by giving them an example of what we want them to do to us. This is the kind of the golden rule, the golden law. And kind of finishing up now a little bit. In the Christian state of mind, loving human beings is to love God, and to love God is to love other human beings. For what we do to others, we also do unto God. What we do to them, God does to us. And this is kind of, I think, the idea that the Imago Dei, if God's image is in all of us, then we have to treat human beings with the respect. This is even in James, he says this too, that we have to respect other human beings because in some way we see a reflection of God in them. And then he deals with the idea of why God permits evil to be done to us. We have to accept this as the good and perfect gift because it's from above. And this is what we did when we did studied kind of the book of James in that other work by Kierkegaard, when he talked about the good and perfect gift from above. This means that it's the will of God, and it will work out. So when evil happens to us, God may not prevent it, but we know that evil will bring about a blessing. And how do we know that? We know it because the greatest evil that was done to mankind was the crucifixion of Christ. And yet the crucifixion turned out to be God's greatest blessing. So when evil is done to us, we should see ourselves in that same context. That if they did evil, and Jesus even said that, if they do evil to me, how much evil will they do to you? The idea is we have to look at evil in the right way. Too many people think of evil as, well, I'm a Christian, so I'm impervious to evil. God would never let any evil happen to me. I've got this protective shield in front of me that evil just can't happen to me. And then when it happens, their faith becomes crushed because they just don't understand that, look at Jesus. God is going to reveal his blessing, and sometimes he does it through evil, the evil that happens to believers. Because...
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't understand is that there are a number of passages in the Bible where it says that God actually sends evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whether or not he sends it directly or indirectly, as a result of a wager with Satan or because he wants to humble someone in order to show some greater virtue. that's part of Christian theology that I think we have to understand. I believe in. Is it the Book of Revelation where it talks about God will send a strong delusion?
I think it's in. So I can't remember where that is. I want to say Romans, but I'm not positive. But now I did remember that. I did remember that example. All bachelors are human. Bob is a bachelor, therefore Bob is human. But we can't say all bachelors are human. Bob is human, therefore he's a bachelor.
Right. I looked that up too. By the way, so what I'm talking about, so there are two things I want to add in here. So talking about that God was sending the strong delusion, that's from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 11. For New International Version, for this reason God sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie. Okay, I have an idea of what that delusion may be, but I can't say it here. And like you were saying about the logical fallacies, I believe you're talking about, and by the way, I'm real rusty on my logic, so I had to do this real quick while you were talking just back there. I believe it's called the undistributed middle term fallacy. Okay. So I don't know if this is the case, but like an example is penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. Does that kind of sound like what you were talking about?
Yeah, there's different versions that it comes in, but that's kind of the same thing. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. But I think he's missing it here. But I'm not. I hate to say anything against him because he's such a great mind, and I just misunderstood what he meant. So I'll kind of leave that for the readers to look into that themselves and to decide whether they think he's right on that issue. I don't know if you have an opinion on that you want to mention.
Well, the thing I wanted to ask you is that Kierkegaard sort of sets the conversation that it's like, insofar as you forgive people, you will be forgiven.
Yes.
Right? Insofar as there is wrath in your heart, wrath will be exacted towards you. I think that sounds really good, and I think there's some truth to that, but I don't know if that's sound Christian doctrine. Like, is the forgiveness that we are supposed to get from God predicated on how much forgiveness we give to other people? Like, it seems like from what I understand of Christian doctrine, that we are utterly forgiven in the repentance of our sins and to accept Jesus Christ as our personal Savior. I could see scenarios that people have been through that make it so that they may make progress on it, but they may never totally forgive the individuals involved in the sin against them. The way that Kierkegaard frames it, I think, is a great religious ethical maxim. I'm just not sure that it's correct because it makes it sound like our salvation is predicated on us, on our ability to forgive others, when our salvation is really predicated on whether or not we accept Jesus Christ. Now, ideally, if we have truly accepted Jesus Christ, we will forgive everyone without hesitation. But there's a lived reality that makes total forgiveness really hard for humans that are finite, flawed human, creations.
I can respond to that. I've thought of that, and one thing we have to consider here is that I don't think that Kierkegaard is talking about earning salvation by being faithful. I think that would be an imitation. He addressed that as an imitation earlier, forcing yourself to forgive. And forgiving out of fear, which would be the same thing. I've got to forgive because I'm afraid I won't be forgiven if I don't forgive. That isn't what he's trying to say here. Is that these are tests, internal tests of ourselves that we need to do. We need to examine ourselves. Are we forgiving others? If we're forgiving others, then we'll be forgiven. If we're not forgiving others, then we're not going to be forgiven. Not because it's a 1-to-1 ratio, that one is predicated on the other, but rather one is a witness to the other. Now, in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. It's the same thing. Or forgive us our sins as we forgive our sinners. We have that like for like there, even in the Lord's Prayer. It doesn't mean that we are going to earn it by forgiving other people. It means that that is how we examine whether we really have faith or not. It's like what Abraham did with Isaac. Okay, he did it as evidence of his faith. He didn't do it reluctantly. I know some pastors preach thinking, how must he have felt? He must have been, going through horrible thoughts and stuff. There's absolutely no mention of that in the Bible. The Bible just says he brought Isaac there. He said, where is the lamb, Father? He says, God will provide. There was no, I hate to do this to you, son, but God said I've got to do it. Okay.
Well, I know you're not going to like this, but because it's an endorsement of the Book of Yasher, which I've been going through right now, and I'll tell you what, there are many, many details of the Book of Yasher fills in on that story that someone needs to reimagine the Kierkegaardian fear and trembling thing in the context of the Book of Yasher. Yeah. Have you read it?
No, I haven't read the book yet. I haven't read it, no.
All right, but someone needs to do fear and trembling in light of the Book of Yasher, because there's essential.
Is it complimentary? Is it complimentary?
It's complimentary, but if I could indicate here, long and short of it is that it's another sort of Jobian wager where Satan bets God that Abraham won't sacrifice Isaac. So that's an interesting little wrinkle in it. And Isaac knows. Isaac. So Satan then appears to Abraham and Isaac and tries to convince them not to do it. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Isaac knows that he's going to be sacrificed by Abraham at the top of Mount Moriah. And get this, Isaac wants to be sacrificed. Yeah. Isaac himself is so faithful that he pleads with Abraham to bind him tighter, so when the sacrifice begins, he won't get up and break free. And that's now this is an apocryphal text, use your own discernment. But let's just say it does have some legitimacy. Bob's harder on these things than I am. Bob has more theological training than I have, so you should trust him. But doesn't that provide some interesting wrinkles to the account? Yeah, but
it's certainly complementary to even what I'm saying, is that there was Abraham, and the Bible tells us, Abraham didn't do this out of fear of God. He did it out of faith. That was the whole thing. But this faith was a witness to Abraham's true faith in God. And that's what Kierkegaard is getting at here. These are not earning it as though Abraham had to earn God's approval by doing this, but it was a sign of Abraham's faith, the reason that he did it. So Kierkegaard goes on, he says, if we can't bear other men's against us, if we can't bear other men's evil against us, how can we bear our sin against him? So when a man sins against us, if we can't bear it, then how can we expect God to bear our sins against him? That I like Kierkegaard's way of putting that. So when people sin against us, we have to be as tolerant towards their sin as God is towards us in our sin. And he goes on to tell us that we must sometimes be solitary in order to meditate upon God's existence. Sometimes we need to go into the closet, maybe even literally go into a closet, and think about things of God in order to really isolate ourselves from thoughts, outside thoughts. That's so hard for me to do, though, I have to confess. Like I told you, my mind wanders all the time, and I really have to focus. That's why Kierkegaard, and that's probably why I started reading Kierkegaard, because he was such good training for me to teach me how to do that. Because you can't read Kierkegaard like a novel where your mind can wander and you still kind of get the plot. With Kierkegaard, every word you got to read and focus on. That's so painful for me to do, but it's such good exercise for me. And he finally says that we do not earn grace by doing the right thing, but rather that we become in a right relationship with God. So he kind of sets that up, that it's not something that we earn by doing the right thing. So it's not like God gives us a laundry list and says, if you want to be a Christian, go get baptized, have communion, go out and join volunteer programs, join a church, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, I've done all of those, so I guess I'm a Christian. It's not that kind of obedience. It's not doing the right thing. It's doing things rightly, I guess is what we might say. We have to be in the right relationship with God for any of that to be of any value. Okay? And the end of works of love.
Wow.
Yeah.
What an intellectual marathon. All right. I got to get outside while there's a little bit of daylight,
Oh,
Bob.
yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you did today and being my partner as we pretty much teach everything that Kierkegaard ever wrote. So we'll be back soon. Download the Noetic app. I'm going to be pivoting more to Mr. CEO guy. So whatever that means, you might be hearing more Bob talking, but I don't know. We'll see what the future holds. It's going to get weird. It's going to get fun.
Okay.
So, but I'll have this edited. You guys can watch a live stream on YouTube. I'll have this edited in a couple hours and put up on the Noetic app and SoundCloud later this evening. All right, Bob.
Thank you, Luke.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Okay. Blessings.
Bye.
Bye-bye.